guys, Chris here again with Project Nerf. I've been asked many times, so I figured it's about time I get around to doing it. Let's do a build guide on a Rapidstrike. Alright, I think the consensus was everybody wanted to see a Rapidstrike build guide, so let's get into it. We're going to start right up here at the front by taking the battery tray out. Rapidstrikes have 3 screws in them. I highly recommend the thumb screws for these, just because it makes it a lot easier to get them out. Alright, and that's exactly what we're going to start with. If you're converting to Lipo, as we're gonna, you see the battery tray, we don't need this section for C batteries anymore. So right down in these holes, there's two screws. We're gonna take them out. They're kind of long. There we go, those are right there. There's a little tab right there. Push that down. Alright, we can take this part of it and just discard it. We don't need it anymore. All we need is the front cap. You can waller this out on the inside if you want to. But there's no need for the most part unless you're trying to put a 2200 mAh battery in there. So anyway, I'm going to spare you guys the agony of pulling the screws out of here, and I'll get right back to you. Alright, I got all the screws out. There are 3 different size screws. So you have let's see if I can show them all off here. Hopefully that focuses. All right, we have one really long one. That goes up here in the front iron sight. Okay, and then we have 5 short ones. Okay, the 3 of them go on the top rail, and then the other 2 in this bottom rail right here. All the rest of them in the body are the same length. So now that we've got this open, you just can't butterfly it because of the battery wire, so we have to proceed cautiously here. Here we go. There's the leads right there. So let me get my cutter and snip those. There we go. You can see the negative battery wire holds the blaster together. Watch out for your in-strike tabs. There were 3. One here, one there, one here. Take those out. This is for the battery door. You can take that out of there. So dealing with the shell, since this is actually pretty easy. Right here where we cut the wire, we're just going to grab that metal tab and pull it out and discard that. We're not going to need it anymore. And pretty much that should do for this side of the shell over here. We don't have to do a whole lot on a Rapidstrike. This side, however, there's quite a few parts, so we're going to start to go ahead and pull those out. All right, the access door, little front side, the rear side, which kind of slots inside the lanyard mount. The stock pulls up and out. There's this pin. You can take that out of there and the whole stock will come off of it. The mag well comes out. Bottom lanyard mount. And now we're getting down to the meat and potatoes here, guys. There's a little plastic tab here. Alright, that's going to be trash because it covers up the positive. Right. And the switch for the mag safety, again, we don't need that anymore. I'm just going to cut this wire. There we go. Okay, this switch right here, while we will nullify it, we're going to cut the wires on it. We're going to leave the switch in place because it's what holds the access door closed. Because if you take this out, right here where my finger is, you're going to have a floppy access door. It's just going to move around kind of crazy. So we're going to leave that switch in ultimately. So we have to take this motor cover off. These are short screws like the ones in the body that go in the rails. There we go. We'll get that out of there. I can make some mods to that a little bit later on. And we're getting down to it here. There's 4 screws obviously in the cage like any other blaster. They're longer. Get that. There we go. Cage is loose. In this blaster's case, again, we're just going to get rid of it. You don't need it. It's the same cage that goes in a stock Strife, but so your upgrade cages are going to be the same. There are 3 screws in the pusher mechanism, and we're going to have to take that out because we definitely have to do some mod work on that. There's one up on the top. And then there's actually 2 underneath here. You can kind of lift the trigger group out as a unit, like this. See there? That's all connected. You can see the other 2 screws, they're kind of buried in there, so. Oops, didn't quite get that one out. There we go. So if we cut these leads off of the switch I was talking about earlier, there we go. We have done a complete teardown on a Rapidstrike. Doesn't take too long. It's going to take us quite a bit longer to get the rest of it set back up. So let me grab a couple of parts and I'll get right back with you. Alright guys, in the interest of saving a little time, I pre-assembled my cage. This is meat and potatoes right here. This is a worker 42.5 acrylic cage. I put the silicon isolators in there, Fang revamp motors, Inferno flywheels. This is kind of just a go-to set for me. And everything is done and lined up in there. It's all screwed down. When you're screwing your motors in, don't forget to put thread locker on them because the motors can vibrate loose. So, but anyway, that's all done. Let's take a look at the pusher mechanism. Okay, there's 5 screws and a couple of clips in here, and we have to make some modifications to that to change our pusher motor. So, first thing we're going to do is get the screws out of it, and again, they're little short ones. I'm going to get the electric just because it's faster. All 5 of those screws are the same length, so you don't have to do anything special there. And so then there are clips on the side of the body right here. So, you know, kind of be extra careful, kind of lift up underneath it, and if it breaks, like this one did, it's fine. There's a million screws in it. So, sometimes they come off without breaking, sometimes they do not. And this one obviously is not. But again, because we have screws and we're not going to lose any of them. All right, there we go. So, we're in. We don't have to mess with anything but this motor. So what I like to do here is take my flush cutters and just go underneath the worm gear and pop it off like that. we're going to upgrade this to a Honey Badger. We're going to use 2S for this. So there's some mods that we have to make. One, the gear is going to push down on there just a little bit further because the shaft is a hair longer. So it's pretty important that you get that gap pretty close to what it was. If it gives you any grief, you can take a plier and very gently push it down. That's about right, give or take. Okay, now we got to modify the back of this case. Right here, this nub is to fit this type of motor. It will not fit this. So we're going to take our flush trimmers and start by removing this back dome, and we still have to take material away. We don't want to go crazy, but we have to make room for our motor tabs and things like that. So that's probably sufficient on this one. We're going to do the same thing here. I just come in from the side with the clippers. And take that off, and then again we're going to trim the fat here. Because if you don't, and that's probably a good place to start. So now we're going to take our motor and set it in there. And as you can see, that that fits pretty good. Our motor tabs are exposed because we need them exposed to solder this back up. Make sure when you put this cover back on that this boss right here, okay, that this metal pin goes in there. If it doesn't, you're gonna have all kinds of problems here. So make sure that your pin lines up. We're going to take a little more out of this top one. There we go. So we've opened this up, so now that our motor tabs stick out the back, so we're going to put the screws back in it, and this is done. So go ahead and button that up, and then we'll move on to the trigger group. All right, so we're on to the trigger group. There are a million wires and switches and things like this, and there is a black screw right here in the end. We'll take that out. Again, it's a little short one, and it's been a long time. There's another screw. If we move these wires out of the way, there we go, right there under my thumb. Hopefully you guys can see it. Screws out of it, and whatnot. We're going to cut some of these wires because it's just going to help us out here, because we have to gut all of this. This is one of those old school mods where we're just not keeping Hasbro parts. So cutting these wires just helps us get everything apart. Alright, and then once you've got the screws out and you get your wires moved, there's one little clip right here, right down here in the bottom. See if I can get that loose. There we go. I got it. I'm I'm sure there are others, but I can't remember where they're at. So we're just gonna have to go along. It has been forever since I did one of these. Here we go. We're moving along now, and yes, you can hear springs springing and all kinds of fun stuff going on in there. Fortunately, and I cannot remember, but I'm thinking there's one more screw underneath this switch. But for the life of me, I can't remember. Oh, okay, there we go. So I just dug that switch out with a screwdriver. And the top of this is now ready to come off. Cut another wire or two here. There we go. Alright, so that little guy that came off with a spring, we're probably not going to need it anymore. There's the trigger spring. This white piece is a lock for the trigger. Get rid of that spring there. There's the rev trigger. Fire trigger, and let's see if I can get the last switch out. You can see it kind of drops in there. There we go. And then this piece right here is actually the Rev Plate. So, yeah, there is a lot of crap that goes on inside this. And we have to get rid of it all because we have to mod this very, very extensively. This is what is actually going to make this a long video. Because ultimately, okay, we have to keep this part of the plate, okay, for our rev trigger. And the top part of the plate here for our fire trigger. Okay, and there's going to be a bunch of trimming and a bunch of all kinds of fun stuff going on in here. And in this upper part of the plate, that's subjective. A lot of times I will cut that off to replace it with our switches. So we know we want one big meaty micro switch here for our rev. And then typically I use the smaller 10 amp switches for this, and then a small roller switch for the third switch for the return. So let me grab some switches, we'll mix some space, and then we'll move on here. Okay, so I set this back in the body, and there's a reason for that. I use anymore one large micro switch for my rev, and then the two smaller micro switches for the other three. So here for our rev, you see we've got some space. We're gonna have to work with the orange plate a bit to get this to go in here. And I always leave an accessory spring on the rev trigger because I don't ever trust the spring in these micro switches to return. As they go over the course of time, that will get a little bit weaker, and then your rev trigger won't return. So always put a spring in there. This boss, sadly, in a Rapidstrike, if you're modding one like this, has got to go. So that's one of the first things we're going to do is just go ahead and take our nippers and get in there and cut that off. And we'll be cutting it off the other side as well. So I just wanted to show you guys that. Let me move the body out of the way here. And get the trigger group back over here. Alright, so obviously we're going to have to cut the lever down. But pretty much that switch fits in there quite nicely. What we're going to have to do is make some space. So let's take the trigger out and take the rev trigger itself out. This bottom wall, that's going to have to be cut down. So don't be too shy about it. Go ahead and remove material that you need removed. It doesn't do you any good to try to be friendly with it. We have to make enough space to put our switch, so if you're trying to spare it good conduct, you're really kind of wasting time, effort, and energy. Okay, and then you can see here, basically we're going to cut this lever off about flush with the top of the switch. So let me grab my Dremel, cut that off, set this all back in here, and then we'll see how much more space we got to make. Okay, so you can see we made some space. I cut down a bunch of this stuff on the bottom, and then I screwed this roller switch in there because rollers work well for this. So, yeah, that works out quite well. So, pretty happy with that. On the other side of the plate, pretty much all of this junk right here has got to come off. So I'm just going to grab the Dremel and saw it off real quick. That is the very quick and dirty, and there's a little post sticking up right here. That's got to go. Alright, but so when we go to put this back on, and you can see a screw in the way here, so cut that like that. And just a matter of turning this into an acceptable switch plate. There we go. Now ideally we can keep it so that this this screw still goes back in it, and this one at the top, but yeah, that's how we do the rev trigger on these. So anyway, let's get this back off. Now, take the rev trigger out for 1 second. On this, you can see these two big screws I put in. They're very pointy. They stick on the back. We're going to have to take the Dremel and cut those off flush so that the plate sits down in the body. So I'm going to cut that off, and then we'll start making room for our trigger switch. Okay, so trigger's in. It's got its spring. The only thing we really have to do here, because we're going to use this small micro switch, is trim the back of this off, just the trigger itself, right here where my finger's at. Okay, we're just going to trim it down a little bit. We're not going to go crazy. We're not going to cut it all the way off. So forgive the noise of the Dremel, but we're going to go ahead and do it. Okay, so you can see we cut that off nice and flush, and that's going to make us just a little bit of extra room to drop this switch in there like that. Okay, and then so it's going to get its spring. We're going to take some screws and screw this switch in, and then I'll show you guys what we're going to do with that roller up at the top, because that one can be a huge pain in the butt. Alright, so you can see we've got our rev trigger in there, we've got our fire trigger, our little micro switch here, and you can see the tabs are, whoops, managed to pop that right out of there. Oh well. The tabs do get a little close to the body, but there's room to do the wiring here, so we're okay. And then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take this piece of the wall here out of my finger to make just a little more room for wiring. You can also take this body mount out right here. Let me slap the trigger back down in there for just a second, because I'm going to show you guys where we're going to go next. Okay, we've managed to save this upper screw boss here, so this will screw together, but from right here at the end of my screwdriver, where the end of the trigger sets, we're going to cut that off. And just make room. We're going to do an epoxy putty mount for our third switch. So let's get that cut off. We'll get this screwed together. And then I'll show you guys what we got to do to get this third switch mounted, and then we'll wire it up. Alright, so you can see we've got our little trigger group in, and I've got the pusher put back in because we have to have it in to set that third switch. Is going to go right in here where my finger's at. But just for fun, I hooked this up to my jumper box and a Lipo here, so you'll be able to watch the pusher do its thing. And this is why we put the third switch in. So here we go. Headphone guys, look out, probably going to get a little loud. I see it there. Right now, if you were just supplying power and cutting it off from the motor, the pusher is going to stop where it stops. It's not like a Strife where it's a spring-loaded return on these. So we wire in a third switch and a return mechanism. So right down in here is where we're going to put the third switch, and I use again a roller, and ultimately it's going to go right in there, probably, and let me see if I can get a little pliers so I can try to keep out of you guys' way some, but it's going to go right in here like that. Okay, so what we're going to do, now that this is screwed back in, is get our epoxy putty and build up a deck to screw this switch down to, and then we can wire it. So, but as you can see here, like I said, this is all back in. I just put the screw back in here, nice and clicky, nice and clicky. So that's it. That's good there. These wires I just left an indeterminate length. They should be plenty. So anyway, let me get some epoxy putty down in that hole right there, get it set up for our switch, and then I'll try to get you guys some close-ups of what I did with that, and then we'll wire it. Alright, so we've got our switch screwed in it. It takes a big plug of epoxy putty, guys, and you've got to let it set up good so that you can screw the switch down snugly. And I realize it's really going to be tough to see here, but there's a lip, a protrusion on the bottom of the arm that sticks down, that right now we have pushing the switch closed. So I've got this still hooked up to my jumper box. We're just going to run it here real quick. See there? Now the switch is open. So as this nub right here at the end of my X-Acto knife comes back, you can hear it clicking. Pushes that switch closed. There we go. So, and like I said, that is shut. And we've taken the time to center the switch up in the middle of this channel right here. Again, I'll try to get you a better view. You can see the switch is setting in the middle because it will hang up on things and cause all kinds of problems. So, and that's one of the biggest issues. So, at this point, we're ready to go ahead and wire it. Alright, I hope you guys know how much I love you. I'm filming this completely out of sequence, and to give you an idea how much out of sequence, the blaster that I was working on in the video has already gone back to my commissioner. But I've had a lot of comments, a lot of requests to do a video guide on wiring a Rapidstrike circuit. Note, this also works on the Elite 2.0 turbine, if you're doing a 3-switch circuit, if you're brave enough to crack one of those bad boys open. So, give me just a second here. We're going to go over all the parts, and then I'll show you how to wire this thing up. Alright, so these are all of the parts that you would be using to wire your 3-switch Rapidstrike. So obviously we have our 2S Lipo battery. We're going to set that off to the side. We have 1, 2, 3 micro switches. Our pusher box, this one's already been modified to accept a Honey Badger motor. I showed you that in the video. Our XT60 connector, and yes, I have the female end here. And then I've got a worker 41.5 millimeter aluminum cage with fang revamps and inferno wheels. This is actually for another project, but it's okay. I'll use it to illustrate this. And then I set these posts in this wood block so that I can set the motor up here, or set the cage up here without it trying to run away from me. So let's start with soldering up your XT60 connector. Okay, I'm going to say immediately and ahead of time, you should have the wiring diagram available to you. If you don't, then proceed at your own risk. This is the one I've been using forever. It's Blaster Tech's. It's a great wiring schematic. I'll put a picture of it up in here for you guys to stop the video on, so that way you can have it available. Take your time with this. Okay, other parts that we're going to have right here, we have a couple of diodes, so we'll be soldering those in to help stop runaway pusher. And anyway, let's get to it. So we're going to grab the XT60s off of here, this and that. I'll set our little project board off to the side and just move that down. Get our little handy hands here. All right, your XT60 connector, guys. Okay, they're clearly marked. Okay, but the flat side, you see we got one side that's got a point and then one side that's flat. The flat side on an XT60 is always the positive. So, note, just like our diagram, we're going to be using 3 different color wires for this. You don't have to, but I think for the sake of this video and illustrating the wiring, that doing the 3rd color wire will be helpful to you, and you know, help us not mess anything up, because we don't want to burn our blaster down. So, all right, so take your plug in here, and then I have the clip that goes over. These are AMAS style connectors, and we're just gonna run that way up the wire here. We're not doing anything fancy with that. Okay. Go ahead and plug the other end, the male end of your XT60 connector in. And the reason for this is it acts kind of like a heat sink and stops this plastic from warping as you do your soldering. So, and we're just going to put that in the handy hand. And kind of get this set up. And again, guys, the flat end, then they're marked right here, positive and negative. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it's okay. Put that in there like that. All right, our soldering iron is already up to temp. Try to do this and not block too much of the camera. I like to take the point of the soldering iron, melt a little solder on it. If you have a problem with it balling up and running off like that, go ahead and clean the tip of your soldering iron off on your sponge. You should have one already wet and available. There we go. You can see we got a nice little blob on there. We're going to stick it in that battery connector. See if I can get this around where you guys can see how I'm doing it. But I like to stick the point in and then just feed the solder to it. Alright, don't rush this. Let the solder flux. Okay, so what'll happen, what I mean, is when you're doing this, you'll see the solder become molten. That's called soldering to a flux, and that is the biggest mistake that people make when soldering stuff up, is that they don't let the solder do its job. And you see that kind of just went in there and filled in the hole for us. Okay, and at this point, we can easily let the wire go. Okay, and that's very strong. That's not going anywhere, so we're going to flip it over and put the black wire in, our negative. Again, we'll run it through our connector over here, our little cap. Just gonna set that up in there. There we go. Line everything up so you can see it. Hopefully. I've never tried to do this type of wiring on camera before because it's kind of complicated and a pain in the rump. Again, you know how much I love you, or you should. Again, we're gonna stick the tip of the soldering iron all the way down in there and just feed solder to it. Let it flux and do its thing. Okay, when you think you got enough, add a little extra. Hopefully you can see on camera there that's bubbling and fluxing and doing its thing, which will help it joint to the metal you're trying to solder to. If you don't solder to a flux, it's just going to pull off. So, as you can see here, again, very strong. And again, the reason we left that clip in here is it helps hold the shape of the battery connector. So just leave that in there like a little heat sink. Doesn't hurt anything. Most of the batteries that we buy these days already have XT60s on them, so we don't need that. All right, we've put the clip on. We can now get rid of that. Okay, our XT60 is wired up. So let's get the project board back up on the bench here, and we'll start wiring the blaster circuit. Okay, as you can see, we got our project board back up here. So let me get everything untangled. We're going to take our red lead, and the battery connector is just going to go over here. Our hot wire is going to come all the way down here to the Rev, and I guess I could mark these for you, or try. All right, so we have Rev, fire, and then this is the cutout switch for the pusher. Hopefully you can see that there, or I've written on those switches. Alright, so our hot lead from the battery, okay, is going to come to the common tab on the Rev switch. That's our lower switch. So it's going to come to right here. Now obviously guys, this is not inside the blaster. This is a gross overusage of wire and things like that. When you're wiring your blaster up, you'll want to doing a Rapidstrike is an exercise in cable management. So, but in this case, for what we're doing, all right, so on these big switches like this one shaped like an L, that's your common. This is the normally open. This is the normally closed. It's very important that you know which tab is which on your switches before you start doing this. Okay? If you're using a smaller switch, let me grab one. If you're using smaller switches like this one, the tabs are in different spots. On one side, they're marked 1, 2, 3. On the other side, here we go. This is common, normally open, and normally closed. And it's in a very similar configuration: common, normally open, normally closed, common, normally open, normally closed. But depending on the orientation of how you set this switch, you can really get bollocksed up really quickly. So be very, very cautious and careful when you're doing this. Okay, so in this case, you can see I've skinned just a little piece of wire back. We're just going to set it inside there. And what I like to do with these big switches when I can, space allows, just kind of bend that out a hair, stick the wire through, and then take my screwdriver and flatten it up. And we're going to take the soldering iron. Again, a little blob of solder right on the end, because nothing melts solder better than molten solder. Again, let that flux, and then what I like to do is take my sponge and cool it, because you can actually melt the plastic on these and then the switch won't function anymore. So be very careful not to overheat it. Okay, and that's good and strong. And that's all we do with the positive lead from our battery connector, is connected to the common tab on our rev switch, or our acceleration switch, whatever you want to call it. Okay, we're going to get our negative roll in here. Now, for me, guys, I do the negative probably a little different than most people. Okay, I know for a fact that this is the positive part of my cage. So I'm going to wire my negative to come across these two terminals and then go out to the rest of the blaster. It saves a little wire and it makes life a little easier. So in this case, we're going to come along here, and that should be plenty enough Okay, a lot of times this silicone insulated wire is really good. You can take your fingernails or something like that and pull it apart. I have a nice wire skinner, so we'll just hit it like that. Okay, pull yourself open some wire, and then I like to use my X-Acto knife, kind of go right through the middle and just open that wire up. Slide it over the motor tab, like that, and solder it on. Again, same as before, little blob of solder on the end of the iron. Hold it right to the top of the tab. We're not trying to solder this to the body of the motor. There we go, that's fluxed in nicely. Wipe the iron off. Okay, we see we've got that on one side, that's good and solid. We're going to drop this down in here and leave a loop of material. Again, it's one of those things you don't have to. You see, I just pulled that open. You don't have to use the wire skinner. They're nice, but they're not required. Okay, and the reason we left that loop is so that the inside of the blaster shell doesn't grab or hang up on our wire or anything like that. Oops. And then I try to twist the wire up like that so that it grips the motor tab well, long enough for me to come in and solder it up. And just lay the iron on there, feed it some solder, let that solder flux in. Okay, and as you can see, that's good and solid. So, right, the negative on the battery clip, straight to the cage, leave the wire running because it's got to come out here and go to all these other switches. So, we're going to grab our third color wire. In this case, I think on the diagram they use blue. In this case, we're going to use white. Doesn't really matter. Okay, now remember, the cage right now is upside down, so it's going to be this way. So our battery lead is going to do this number and come out that way. Okay, so we want to put our wire in this way so that when we flip the cage over, it comes out the bottom just like this black one. So what I did here, I skinned this, and then I'm going to separate about half of it off, give or take, and twist it up. This is how I do this. I'm not saying it's the best way, but it works well. And I have never had any difficulties with solders letting go or anything like that. Take your time, make good clean solders, make good strong points, and your blaster will be more reliable. Okay, so where I've twisted this up, hopefully, you'll be able to see it, that we're going to go through the motor tab just like that, through the little hole in it, and then we're going to twist it a couple of times to hold it in place. Just like that. Okay, now we're going to solder that on. And that's going to be rock solid when we, you know, for the long haul. This is, if it's worth building, it's worth overbuilding. There we go. That's plenty. Then if you're worried about, this is a positive lead, if you're worried about that sticking off, come to the other side and just clip that off like that so that it doesn't touch on anything. Again, leave a little slack between. There we go. See, I've got that opened up. Again, we're going to take our knife, go right down through the middle, open ourselves a little hole like that. And we left quite a bit of slack in this, and that's okay. There we go. That's on there, and it's not going to move, at least not until we solder it on. Little solder on the end of our iron right to the motor terminal here. Just feed that in, let it flux, do what it does. Okay, and that's rock solid, guys. It's not going anywhere. Okay, so at this point, we can actually go ahead and put our cage in place. The cage for the Rapidstrike is now soldered up. I know we got a mess going on over here with these wires. All you guys are thinking I'm crazy. I promise you, I'm not that crazy. Okay, so we're going to come over the top here. It doesn't really matter. Set our motor. Set our cage in place here. There we go. I'll even put a screw in it to see we did, just to hold it down. Okay. Doesn't really matter where we proceed from here. Okay, we have our black lead, that's our negative, coming off the battery connector to the flywheel cage. Okay, and then we're going to come out with it. Okay, and we're going to go up here to our pusher cutout switch. We're just going to run it back. We're going to just do one stretch of wire, and this is a little tougher. And I realize that a lot of this stuff is in the way here, but we're going to rough this in. All right, so it's going to come over here to there, and then it's going to go to the pusher motor. So we're going to go ahead and clip this off. Again, we're going to leave plenty of meat. Okay, so we'll kind of get this untangled a bit. All right, so from the motors, from the flywheels, okay, we're going to go to the normally open on our pusher cutout switch, okay? So, again, this one is upside down because of where the pusher is going to ride and push on the switch. So, this is common, normally open. This one closest to the top of the wood is normally closed. So, we're going to solder onto right there. Okay, so we're going to come in here. Skin a piece of this wire back. Just being a pain in the butt. Okay, and this is a solder joint that I do often. All right, so we're going to tin up this section of wire that I skinned here. And blob of solder on the iron, hold it to the wire, and just feed some solder on until it starts to mold and cover up the wire. Okay, now that we've got that, and I'll try to do this in a way that you guys can see it. Hopefully I won't get in the way too much. Now that that wire is tinned up, okay, we take our iron that's got some solder on it already, and we heat the solder that we already liquefied onto the wire and heat it to the motor tab. Okay, and then that will bend out of the way like that. So, and you can see that's good and strong. All right, not too hot. And then the last part of this comes off and goes to the negative of our pusher box. So we'll skin this. Give that a twist again. I'm going to use the handy hand to say I did. We're going to tin up the end of that wire that we just skinned and solder it onto our pusher. There we go. There's some solder on the end of that. That's all we're going to need. There we go. That's on the motor tab now. we left ourselves plenty of space to set all this and play with it, because I'm going to have to hold everything down to make it work for you. But so there we go. That is the negative lead. So now the hot wire from the battery connector is in. There's no more to do with that. Okay, the negative from the battery connector, again, is run out to our cage, has run out to our cutout switch, and has run out to our pusher box. So we only have one more wire to put in, and that's going to be our white one, which we've already done to the front of the cage. So now it jumps between all of these switches. So this one's the complicated one. We're just going to go nice and slow and take our time here. Okay, so let me clear some stuff out of the way, and then we'll get back to soldering that one up. All right, so again, we've put our hot in, we've put our cold in. Now this is the one that's going to carry current all over the place, and it's an exercise here, guys. So yeah, just have to take your time with it. So we're going to do 2 of these split joints and just let the one wire continue along. So it's going to route down around here roughly and go to the normally open, okay, from the cage, okay, on our rev switch. So we're going to skin a piece of it back. Tin it up and solder it on to that switch post. For the sake of this, and we're just going to come in here and do this number. There's plenty of solder on it to hold it. Probably could use a dab more here. Because we want the circuit to work, so. Alright, and that's, there we go, cooled it off with a sponge so it doesn't do anything we don't want it to. And I will tack all this wiring down with hot glue here at the end before we test the circuit. But okay, so we're coming from our motor cage in around, we're on the normally open tab. This wire is now going to come back off, okay, and it's going to go up to the normally open on our trigger. So common, normally open, so it's going to go right here. So it's going to swing around and connect right there. Okay, so again, we're going to skin it, tin it, and connect it. So again, I like to use the handy hand when I'm tinning wires. It just makes life a little easier here. They are incredibly helpful for this. There we go, nice big blob of solder on that wire. And I'll try not to get it into the way too much. We're going to heat that solder up until it fluxes and sticks to the plate. There we go. Hold it for a second. Cool it. Make sure our switch is still clicky. Okay, and then from here, so from the normally open on our fire switch, the white wire, blue I think in the diagram, but in this case our white wire is going to go up, follow around to the normally closed on our pusher switch here. So we're going to carry this up. We've got plenty of wire here. Let me just clip this off. Same thing. We'll tin it and then stick it on the switch. Alright, so again, This switch is upside down, so common, again, normally open here, normally closed, is the closest to the top of the wood. Okay, so we're moving along here. Our wiring is actually starting to look pretty good. All right, so now, you know, we've got a bunch more switch tabs. We've got the common on our cutout. We have the normally closed and the common on our fire, and then we still have the positive on our motor. So there's actually only 2 more wires to put in, guys. Again, they're using the alternate color wire for this. They're using blue. We're using white is because, I don't know, I don't use white that common, and I have a fair amount of it. So, from the common on the trigger switch, on the fire switch here. So, from this tab, okay, we're going straight up to the positive on our pusher motor here. So, let's take a piece of wire and solder that in. You could use an alternate color if you wanted to. You could go back to red. Perhaps I should for the sake of doing this, but again, they show all of these connections here in the alt color. Again, so we're going from the common. So again, I like to kind of just take my tool and bend that out just a little bit. Push it in there, and then take my screwdriver or knife or something like that and fold the wire down along the bottom of the tab. Like that, and just take the soldering iron and go ham on it. And heat up a little blob, put it on the tip of your iron. There we are. Cool that. You can hear the hiss. Those things get really hot really fast, and we don't want to warp the plastic. And then you can take and bend that tab back in if you want to. All right, again, this end will tin up. It's going to go to the other side of our pusher motor. Note on these, it does not matter on the pusher motor, positive or negative, which way, because this is all rotary, so it doesn't matter which way the motor spins, the pusher acts the exact same way. Alright, so we've got that tinned in. Let's see if we can get it connected to the motor tab there. Looks like we got it. Alright, cool. So, alright, common on the fire switch to the positive on the pusher motor. We've only got 1 more wire to put in, guys. That's going to go from the normally closed, okay, on the fire switch to the common on the cutout switch. So it's going to go from here to there. Well, you can see I've got a nice piece here. Let's get it skinned. Let's get it soldered up. There we go, that fluxed on fine. Yep, good. Cool. Wet the iron. Again, we'll tin up the last end here. Alright, that's that. Okay, as you can see, I've hot glued the wires down and made it a little neater here. Let's plug in the battery and see if everything goes. If we've done our job right and we've followed the wiring diagram, and you can see I've got the battery plugged in there, it should rev. Okay, and that's, believe it or not, guys, that's actually working the way it's supposed to. Okay, when we pull the rev, the pusher is going. That's because we're not holding down our pusher switch. See? So, for this to work as it should, if we hold that down like that, there we go. Our flywheels are revving, they're doing their thing. Now when we push this, this is going to ride. Alright guys, so it's all wired up, and as you can see, doing one of these is actually an exercise in cable management. There is a lot of wiring running through here. But it's all done. There is one more thing that I like to do, right, to help clear any wires and things like that, and that's the stock. So if I take that out for just a second, okay, it came out to about here. You can see I trimmed this off and then rounded these edges over here, particularly on the bottom, because we got wires running right in there. So anyway, yeah, trimming that stock down will help you not tear up any of your wires. So let's get a battery hooked up and see if this thing goes. Alright guys, so we've got it hooked up here, and you'll see when we do our firing that we let go of everything, the pusher will automatically return back. So, and that's what we want. That's why we're doing a 3-switch system here. So, anyway, let's give it a test. So yeah, that works just fine. Let's go ahead and button this bad boy back up, and we'll give it a test fire.
Rapidstrike, ready for action. Nice.
Alright guys, hope you enjoyed that. I know it's been a long video, but with the wiring segment in there, which a lot of people have been asking about, and I haven't seen one either, so I thought I would go ahead and take the time and add that in the video for you guys. You saw me do a very old school way of mounting the switches. I want to point out that is not the easiest. Matter of fact, it's probably the most difficult. This day and age, with the advent of 3D printing, you can do something like this. I grabbed this from Containment Crew. This is a Rapidstrike switch plate. Okay, you can see the screws where we can mount all of our large micro switches in here and have them in the proper position, ready to just drop into the blaster. So this is a great option if you're going to do the wiring, as I showed you in the video here. If not, and you can get your hands on one, the Kelly Industries switch plate takes a lot of the fuss out of the wiring for you. Simply put, once you connect the switches to it, you have inputs from the battery out to the flywheel cage and then out to the pusher motor. All the rest of it is self-contained inside the board. And they're really a good product. I like them a lot, but like I said, they're getting a little harder to come across, and so I wanted to demonstrate to everybody that you don't have to have that to make yourself a really good Rapidstrike. Guys, if you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe button, click that notification so that you can be advised of our future content. In the description box below, you'll find links to the Etsy shop, where we've put some new blasters in there, so you'll definitely want to check that out. Link to our Facebook page, our contact email, and our fan mail address if you decide that you would like to write or send a product in to be reviewed. That's going to be the address you're going to use. Guys, till next time, this is Chris for Project Nerf saying have a blast.